Han Wu woke up every morning at 5:30, just like he had for the past 15 years. He would make coffee in his small kitchen, check the weather readings on his tablet, and walk outside to tend his crops. The purple grain swayed gently in Haven's Rest morning breeze, and the hybrid vegetables grew in neat rows that stretched toward the horizon. This was his life now. Simple, quiet, safe. Nobody on this farming colony knew that Han Wu used to be someone else entirely. They saw a man who worked hard, kept to himself, and raised his daughter alone after her mother died in a transport accident. They didn't know that before So-Jin was born, Han had a different name that made grown aliens check their weapons and lock their doors. Ghostwalker. Even now, saying it in his mind made his hands shake slightly. So-Jin was 12 years old and everything good in Han's world. She had her mother's bright smile and curious eyes, but she also had something that reminded Han of himself. A stubborn streak that could move mountains. Every evening after school, she would help him in the fields, chattering about her friends and her classes. Then she would take her evening walk around the settlement, something she had done since she was old enough to walk safely alone. That Tuesday started like any other day. Han finished his work as the twin suns began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. So-Jin kissed his cheek and headed out for her usual walk, promising to be back before full dark. Han cleaned his tools and went inside to start dinner. He made her favorite, noodles with the sweet sauce she loved. 7 o'clock came and went. So-Jin was never late for dinner. Han stepped outside and called her name, listening for her voice to carry back on the wind. Nothing. 8 o'clock. 9 o'clock. The food grew cold on the table as Han walked the settlement paths, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they had seen his daughter. By 10 o'clock, half the settlement was searching. Minho the mechanic organized search teams. Jung-Soo the teacher called the local security forces. Old Q Nam, who ran the general store, handed out flashlights and comms devices. They spread out across Haven's Rest, calling So-Jin's name into the growing darkness. It was Jung-Soo who found the backpack. The bright red bag So-Jin carried everywhere lay torn and empty near the spaceport landing pad. The metal zipper was broken, and there were scorch marks on the ground nearby, not the kind that came from ship engines, but the precise burns left by military weapons. Han knelt beside the backpack and picked up the small charm So-Jin had attached to the zipper pull. It was a tiny metal flower, something she had made in school crafts class. His hands didn't shake now. They were perfectly steady as he stood up and walked toward the spaceport security office. The security footage was grainy, but clear enough. 4 figures in dark combat armor had waited near the landing pad. When So-Jin walked past, they had grabbed her. The recording showed her fighting, kicking, and struggling as they dragged her toward a sleek black ship that had no identification markings. The ship lifted off exactly 4 minutes after landing. Han watched the footage 3 times. Professional kidnappers, military equipment, a ship designed for quick, quiet work. This wasn't random. Someone had specifically targeted his daughter, which meant someone knew who he really was. Back at his house, Han dismissed the worried neighbors who had gathered. He thanked them for their help and promised to contact the proper authorities. After they left, he stood alone in his kitchen, looking at the cold dinner still sitting on the table. 2 plates, 2 sets of chopsticks, So-Jin's favorite cup, decorated with cartoon animals. Han walked to the corner of the kitchen and knelt down. His fingers found the hidden catch in the floorboard, and a section lifted away to reveal a compartment he hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside lay the tools of his former trade, carefully preserved and maintained even though he had sworn never to use them again. The armor was matte black, designed to absorb light and sensor readings. The weapons were custom built, each one capable of taking down vehicles or cutting through reinforced walls. The communication devices connected to networks that officially didn't exist, channels used by mercenaries, bounty hunters, and people who operated in the spaces between laws. As Han lifted the armor from its hiding place, his neighbor Tai Min appeared in the doorway. The old alien had lived next door for 10 years, and Han had always suspected he knew more than he let on. Now Tai Min's 4 eyes held no surprise, only sad understanding. How long have you known? Han asked. Since the second year you lived here, Taemin replied in his careful human speech. Your daughter is in great danger. Yes. You will need a ship. Mine is the fastest on this colony. Han nodded his thanks. As he sealed the armor around his body, feeling the familiar weight and the way it moved with him like a second skin, he activated the communication array. The encryption was military grade, the frequency one that would reach certain ears across 3 sectors of space. Ghostwalker is active, he said into the transmitter. Clear the hunting grounds. Then Han Wu, farmer and father, walked out into the night to become something the galaxy had hoped never to see again. Taemin's ship cut through hyperspace toward the outer rim territories, where law was a suggestion and survival depended on who you knew. Han sat in the pilot's chair, his fingers dancing across controls he hadn't touched in 15 years. The muscle memory came back instantly, like riding a bicycle or remembering how to breathe. The first call Han made was to Jiwook, the information broker. Jiwook operated out of a hollowed-out asteroid in the Kepler belt, selling secrets to anyone with enough credits in the stomach for what they might learn. He had worked with Han back in the Ghostwalker days, providing target locations and escape routes for the right price. I heard rumors you were dead. Jiwook's voice crackled through the comm system, his translator making his alien speech sound almost human. I was, Han replied. Someone made a mistake by bringing me back. Jiwook's laugh was like grinding metal. What do you need, Ghostwalker? Han described the ship from the security footage. Sleek, black, unmarked but clearly military design. Within an hour, Jiwook had an answer. The vessel belonged to the Crimson Syndicate, a slaving operation that had grown bold in recent years. They specialized in what they called exotic acquisitions, rare species captured for private collectors who paid enormous sums for unusual pets. Humans are mythical in some sectors, Jiwook explained. Your people are so rare out here that collectors will pay 10 times the usual rate for one. A human child. He paused. The price would be astronomical. Han's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Where do they operate? They move constantly, but I can give you a starting point. Try Nexus Station. Look for a smuggler named Daeho. He used to run supplies for them before he went independent. Nexus Station squatted in space where 3 different territorial borders met, which meant it belonged to nobody and everybody at the same time. Pirates, smugglers, and mercenaries used it as neutral ground for deals that couldn't happen in civilized space. The station looked like someone had welded together spare parts from a dozen different ships, creating a sprawling maze of corridors, bars, and trading posts. Han docked Taemin's ship and walked through the station's main thoroughfare. Aliens of every description filled the crowded spaces. Some he recognized from his mercenary days, others were completely new to him. The air smelled like machine oil, exotic spices, and things he didn't want to identify. Conversations happened, in a dozen languages, but they all stopped when people noticed him walking past. Word traveled fast in places like this. Within minutes, everyone on Nexus Station knew that Ghostwalker was hunting again. Finding Daeho took less than an hour. The Corthanian smuggler was drinking alone in a bar called the Broken Drive, trying very hard to look invisible. He was a small alien with gray-green skin and 4 arms, the kind of person who survived by knowing when to run and when to hide. When Han sat down across from him, Daeho's large eyes went wide with terror. I don't know anything, Daeho said, immediately his translator making his panic sound almost comical. I haven't asked you anything yet, Han replied calmly. Whatever you're going to ask, I don't know it. Han leaned forward slightly. Crimson Syndicate. You used to run supplies for them. Where are they staging their operations now? Daeho's 4 hands shook as he raised his drink. I stopped working with them months ago. Too dangerous. They've been taking bigger risks, grabbing targets from protected worlds, like Haven's Rest. I wouldn't know anything about that, but Daeho's eyes said otherwise. Han reached across the table and gently took the glass from Daeho's hands. The simple gesture was somehow more threatening than any weapon could have been. They took my daughter. I'm going to find her. You can help me do that quietly, or I can ask you questions the hard way. Your choice." The interrogation lasted exactly 3 minutes. Deho told Han everything he knew about the Crimson Syndicate's current operations. They were using an old asteroid mining facility in the Vega system as a temporary staging area, processing captured targets before moving them to permanent locations. The facility was lightly guarded because it was supposed to be secret. "The boss is Hai Jin," Deho whispered. "Ruthless even by Syndicate standards, but he's just middle management. The real money comes from private collectors who place special orders." Han stood to leave, then paused. "If anyone asks, this conversation never happened." "What conversation?" Deho replied quickly. The asteroid facility floated in empty space, looking abandoned except for the faint energy readings that indicated life support and artificial gravity. Han approached during the shift change, when security would be focused on internal transfers rather than external threats. Taemin's ship was small enough to slip past their sensors, especially with Han's modifications to the stealth systems. Getting inside required patience and old skills. Han found a maintenance airlock on the facility's dark side and cut through the outer seal with a plasma torch. The maintenance tunnels were exactly where they should be. Asteroid miners always built their facilities the same way, with service corridors running parallel to the main passages. Moving through the narrow tunnels, Han felt like he was 20 years younger. Every step was silent, every breath controlled. He had learned this kind of infiltration during his mercenary training, perfected it through years of practice, and never completely forgotten it, despite 15 years of farming. The facilities. Central computer was poorly secured. The Crimson Syndicate relied on secrecy rather than digital protection. Han accessed their recent logs and found what he was looking for. Sojin had been held here for 2 days before being moved to their main auction facility on Kepler Prime. The records showed she was classified as Premium Acquisition, Human Juvenile Female, Excellent Condition. Reading those words, Han had to stop and breathe slowly to keep his anger under control. His daughter wasn't merchandise. She was a 12-year-old girl who liked to draw pictures of flowers and always helped with the dishes after dinner. The computer files revealed more disturbing information. Sojin had already been sold to a private collector named Thane Voss, a wealthy noble whose name appeared in several incident reports filed by Galactic Council investigators. The reports were heavily censored, but Han could read between the lines. Voss collected sentient beings for purposes that went far beyond simple ownership. As Han downloaded the files, he planted small explosive charges throughout the facility's critical systems. When he was finished, he accessed the facility's communication array and recorded a message that would be broadcast to every Crimson Syndicate operation in the sector. "My name is Ghostwalker," he said into the recorder. "You have something that belongs to me. Return my daughter unharmed within 48 hours, or I will erase every trace of your organization from existence. This is not a threat. This is a promise." Han triggered the explosives as his ship cleared the facility's debris field. Behind him, the asteroid mining station disappeared in a brief, brilliant flash that would be visible for light years in every direction. The Crimson Syndicate would get his message loud and clear. Now he had a name, Thane Voss, and a destination. Kepler Prime was 3 days away at maximum speed, which meant Sojin was still alive and Han still had time to reach her. The hunt was just beginning. Kepler Prime made Han sick to his stomach. The planet sparkled like a jewel against the black of space, its cities glowing with artificial light that never dimmed. This was where the galaxy's wealthiest beings came to buy things that couldn't be purchased in civilized space. Pleasure palaces, gladiator arenas, and auction houses operated openly here, protected by officials who had been bought and paid for long ago. Han spent 2 days watching the Crimson Syndicate's auction house from a rented room across the street. The building looked respectable from the outside. Clean white walls, elegant architecture, discreet security that didn't advertise its presence. But Han knew what happened in the basement levels, where sentient beings were kept in stasis pods like products waiting to be sold. The facility's security was impressive. Guard towers at each corner, energy shields covering all entrances, patrol drones that swept the perimeter every 15 minutes. The guards themselves were professionals, Not syndicate thugs, but actual military contractors carrying weapons that could punch through starship armor. Getting inside would require patience and timing. Han studied the building's blueprints, which he had purchased from a corrupt city planning official for the price of a small starship. The auction house had been built on top of an old geothermal power plant, and the original cooling system still ran beneath the newer structure. More importantly, those systems connected to the city's maintenance tunnels. The auction was scheduled to begin at midnight, when Kepler Prime's artificial night cycle provided darkness for activities that preferred to avoid daylight. Han made his move 2 hours early, slipping into the maintenance tunnels through a service hatch 6 blocks away from the target building. The geothermal cooling pipes were exactly where the blueprints indicated they would be. Han followed them through the underground maze, his armor's sensors guiding him toward the auction house. The pipes carried superheated water away from the building's climate control systems, creating a passage that no security system would monitor because no sane person would try to crawl through scalding hot tunnels. Han wasn't entirely sane anymore. Not since they took So-Jin. The pipes led him directly into the auction house's basement level, where the merchandise was stored. Han cut through the pipe wall with a plasma torch and dropped into a storage room filled with supply crates. His armor's cooling systems worked overtime to protect him from the residual heat, but he ignored the discomfort and focused on the mission. The basement was a maze of corridors and holding cells. Han moved through them like a ghost, avoiding security cameras and pressure sensors with skills learned during decades of infiltration work. His destination was the stasis pod chamber, where the auction items were kept unconscious until needed. The chamber was larger than Han had expected. Rows of transparent pods lined the walls, each one containing a different species. He saw beings he recognized and others that were completely alien to him. All of them were someone's son or daughter, someone's family member who had been stolen from their homes and brought here to be sold. So-Jin was in pod number 23. She floated in the preservation fluid, her eyes closed and her breathing slow. Monitoring cables connected to ports on her arms and neck, feeding her body the minimum nutrients needed to keep her alive. She looked so small in the adult-sized pod, like a child playing dress-up in clothes that didn't fit. Han's hands shook as he accessed the pod's control system. The stasis release sequence took 90 seconds. 90 seconds during which alarms could sound and guards could arrive. He forced himself to wait, watching the countdown timer while his daughter slowly returned to consciousness. So-Jin's eyes opened just as the pod's lid hissed open. For a moment she looked confused and frightened, not recognizing where she was or how she had gotten there. Then she saw Han's face through his armor's visor, and relief flooded her expression. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice weak from the stasis. "Drugs. I'm here, So-Jin. I'm going to get you out of this place." Han helped his daughter out of the pod, wrapping her in a thermal blanket he had brought. She was wearing the same clothes she had on during her evening walk 3 days ago, but they had fitted her with a tracking collar that would have to be removed carefully. "There are others," So-Jin said, looking at the remaining pods. "They took a lot of people, Dad. Kids and adults from all over the galaxy." Han looked at the 37 other pods in the chamber. Leaving them behind felt wrong, but trying to evacuate 40 people would make escape nearly impossible. Then he thought about what So-Jin would think of him if he abandoned these people to save her alone. "We're taking everyone," he decided. Han began the release sequence for all the pods simultaneously. As each person awakened, he quickly explained the situation and handed them basic clothing and equipment. Most of them were too disoriented to fully understand what was happening, but they followed his instructions because he was clearly their best chance at survival. The first alarm sounded when Han was freeing the last group of prisoners. Someone had noticed the unauthorized access to the stasis systems, and security was responding. Han could hear boots running in the corridors above them, and the building's defensive systems were powering up. "Stay close to me," Han told the group of freed prisoners. "We're going to move fast and stay together. If shooting starts, get down and let me handle it." The first security team arrived just as Han was leading the prisoners toward the emergency stairwell. 6 guards in full combat armor carrying weapons designed to stop dangerous criminals. They saw Han and immediately opened fire, not caring that they might hit the innocent people he was protecting. Han's response was swift and decisive. His own weapons were more advanced than anything the guards carried, and his combat experience turned the fight into a one-sided massacre. Within seconds, all 6 guards were down, and Han was already moving toward the next objective. More guards appeared as they climbed toward the ground floor. Han fought a running battle through the auction house's corridors, using his knowledge of the building's layout to stay ahead of the security response. The freed prisoners followed. Behind him, some of them helping to carry others who were still weak from stasis. In the main auction hall, Han could see wealthy buyers fleeing in panic as the situation spiraled out of control. Tables of exotic foods and expensive drinks had been abandoned, and security forces were setting up defensive positions around the exits. The chaos worked in Han's favor. With so many people running in different directions, it was hard for the guards to identify their real targets. Han's comm system crackled with an intercepted message from the auction house's management. Thane Voss, the buyer who had purchased Sojin, had already left Kepler Prime. He was returning to his private estate with a small collection of premium acquisitions that had been delivered to him personally, bypassing the auction entirely. Sojin was supposed to be among those acquisitions. The only reason she was still here was because Han had moved faster than anyone expected. But now Voss knew he was coming, which meant the next phase would be even more dangerous. Han led the freed prisoners toward the building's service exit, fighting through 2 more security teams along the way. Behind them, the auction house burned as Han's explosive charges destroyed the syndicate's records and equipment. Local authorities were finally responding, but their intervention only added to the confusion as different factions began shooting at each other. As they reached the extraction point where Taemin waited with the ship, Sojin grabbed her father's arm. "Dad, what you did in there? You've done this before, haven't you?" Han looked at his daughter, seeing a new understanding in her eyes. She had always known he was different from other parents, but now she was beginning to understand what that difference really meant. "Yes," he said simply. "I used to be someone else before you were born. Someone dangerous." "Are you still dangerous?" Han helped her into the ship as explosions lit up the night behind them. "Only to people who threaten my family." Thane Voss's estate wasn't just a house or even a city. It was an entire moon converted into a fortress. As Han's ship approached through the outer system, he could see defensive platforms floating in orbit like deadly satellites. Each platform carried enough firepower to destroy a battle cruiser, and there were dozens of them surrounding the moon, in perfect formation. The moon's surface had been completely terraformed. Elegant gardens covered what used to be crater-scarred rock, and gleaming towers rose from artificial valleys. But Han's trained eye could see the hidden weapon emplacements and shield generators built into the landscape. This wasn't just a rich man's playground. It was a military installation disguised as paradise. Getting inside through force would be impossible. Even a full military assault would struggle against those defenses, and Han was just one man with a borrowed ship. He needed a different approach, something that would get him past the guards and into the estate itself. The answer came from the intercepted communications Han had gathered from the auction house. Voss regularly hired handlers for his collection, specialists who understood how to manage different species and keep them healthy for long-term captivity. The estate was currently looking for someone with human expertise, since humans were so rare in this part of the galaxy. Han spent a day crafting a false identity. He became Sung-Min Park, a former xenobiologist who had lost his research position due to ethical disagreements with his university. His credentials were impressive but checkable. His references were people who would vouch for him in exchange for payment, and his story explained why he would be willing to work for someone like Voss. The initial interview took place over subspace communication. Voss appeared on Han's screen as a tall, pale humanoid with features that might have been handsome, if not for the coldness in his eyes. He wore expensive clothing and spoke with the accent of the core world's elite. But there was something predatory in the way he smiled. "Your application is quite interesting, Dr. Park," Voss said, reviewing Han's fabricated credentials. Human behavioral psychology is a rare specialty. Most researchers in that field are humans themselves, and they tend to be rather protective of their species. I've moved beyond such limitations, Han replied, keeping his voice steady. Scientific advancement requires objectivity. Personal attachments are counterproductive. Voss seemed pleased by this answer. Indeed, and you would have no moral objections to working with specimens acquired through unconventional means? My only concern is proper specimen care. How they were acquired is irrelevant to their biological needs. The interview continued for another hour, with Voss testing Han's knowledge and commitment. Han passed every test, drawing on genuine scientific knowledge mixed with carefully prepared lies. By the end, Voss was satisfied enough to extend an invitation for an in-person meeting. I'll send coordinates for the private landing platform, Voss said. Come alone, of course. Security protocols require all visitors to be thoroughly screened. Han's ship was searched 3 times before he was allowed to land. Guards scanned every inch of the vessel and confiscated anything that could be used as a weapon. They also fitted Han with a tracking collar that would monitor his location and vital signs throughout his visit. The collar looked decorative, but Han could feel the sensors and neural interface ports hidden beneath the expensive metal. The estate's interior was even more disturbing than Han had expected. What Voss called his menagerie was actually a museum of living beings, each one trapped in carefully designed enclosures that mimicked natural habitats while providing no hope of escape. Han saw creatures from across the known galaxy, some in cages, others in force field barriers, all of them looking at their captors with expressions of hopeless resignation. Magnificent, isn't it? Voss said, as he led Han through the main exhibition hall. Each specimen represents years of planning and considerable expense. The Altarian singer in that enclosure cost me 3 million credits and required a 6-month operation to acquire. She performs traditional death songs every evening at sunset. Han forced himself to nod appreciatively while memorizing the layout of security cameras and guard positions. Impressive collection. The habitat design shows real attention to species-specific needs. Oh yes, proper care is essential. Dead specimens are worthless and unhealthy ones lose their appeal quickly. Each enclosure is custom-built based on extensive research into optimal living conditions. The beings remain physically and mentally stable for decades this way. As they walked deeper into the estate, Han saw horrors that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Sentient beings treated like exotic pets, kept in comfortable prisons while their captors admired them like artwork. Some of the prisoners had been here so long they no longer seemed to remember what freedom felt like. The human section is particularly special, Voss continued, leading Han toward a restricted area marked with additional security barriers. Humans are so rare in this sector that most collectors have never seen one in person. I currently have 3 specimens, though one of them is quite recent and still adjusting to captivity. Han's heart pounded as they approached the secure wing, but he kept his expression neutral. Recent acquisitions can be challenging. Humans are known for their adaptability, but they also tend to be stubborn about accepting new circumstances. Exactly. You clearly understand the species. The young female I acquired last week has been particularly spirited. She refuses to eat properly and keeps trying to damage her enclosure. I was hoping you might have suggestions for conditioning protocols. They stopped in front of a reinforced viewing window. Inside the cell beyond, Han saw So-Jin sitting on a simple bed, her back turned to the window. She looked unharmed, but thinner than when he had last seen her. The cell was comfortable, furnished like a bedroom with books, entertainment systems, and everything a child might need. Everything except freedom. As you can see, I've provided excellent accommodations, Voss said proudly. Climate-controlled, nutritionally balanced meals, educational materials appropriate for her developmental stage. Yet she remains uncooperative. Han watched his daughter through the window, fighting to keep his voice level. What specific behaviors are you trying to modify? She keeps asking for her father. Claims he'll come for her, which is obviously impossible, since humans have no significant presence in this sector. I need her to accept that her previous life is over and adapt to her new circumstances. Defiant specimens are much less valuable than compliant ones. Conditioning a human child requires patience, Han said, his hands clenched behind his back. Humans form strong emotional attachments. You'll need to gradually break those connections while establishing new dependencies. Voss nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly what I was thinking. Perhaps we could begin with extended isolation periods, followed by reward-based compliance training. I have experience with similar techniques on other species. Han looked at his daughter through the reinforced glass, seeing her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. She was trying to be brave, but she was still just a 12-year-old girl who missed her father and didn't understand why this was happening to her. The isolation approach could work, Han said carefully, but you'll want to be careful not to damage her psychologically. Broken specimens have limited value. Of course, which is why I need an expert handler, someone who understands human psychology and can guide the conditioning process properly. Voss turned to face Han directly. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous contract, Dr. Park. Exclusive access to study human behavior under controlled conditions, plus compensation that would make you wealthy enough to retire. Han met Voss's eyes and smiled the cold smile he had perfected during his mercenary years. When do we start? As they continued the tour, Han memorized every detail of the estate's defenses and security protocols. He noted guard rotations, camera blind spots, and the locations of weapons caches. Most importantly, he confirmed that Sojin was being held in the estate's most secure section, protected by multiple layers of defensive systems. But Han also saw something else in Voss's eyes as the man described his conditioning plans for Sojin. This wasn't just about collecting rare specimens. Voss enjoyed the power he held over helpless beings, took pleasure in breaking their spirits and watching them surrender hope. That night, as Han was shown to guest quarters in the estate's residential wing, he began planning his next move. He had gained access to the fortress and located his target. Now he needed to find a way to get Sojin out alive while ensuring that Thane Voss would never threaten anyone's family again. The collector's gambit had worked. Now it was time for the Ghost Walker to make his final move. Han waited until 3 in the morning before making his move. The estate's security protocols showed reduced patrols during the deep night cycle, when most of the staff assumed their employer was safely asleep. What they didn't know was that Han had spent the evening studying their routines and planting small explosive devices throughout the facility's power grid. The first explosion took out the main generator, plunging half the estate into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows through the corridors as backup systems struggled to compensate. In the confusion, Han moved through the mansion like a ghost, avoiding security teams that rushed toward the apparent system failure. Getting to Sojin's cell required passing through 3 security checkpoints, each one more heavily defended than the last. The first checkpoint fell to stealth. Han disabled the guards silently, using techniques learned during his mercenary training. The second required more direct action as automated systems detected his presence and sounded alarms throughout the wing. By the time Han reached the third checkpoint, the entire estate was in chaos. Emergency sirens wailed. Guards shouted orders in multiple languages, and Voss's voice echoed through communication speakers demanding status reports. Han fought his way through the final security barrier, his weapons cutting through advanced armor and energy shields like they were made of paper. Sojin was awake when he reached her cell, pressed against the reinforced window with hope and fear battling in her eyes. The locking mechanism was military-grade, designed to contain beings with superhuman strength, but Han's plasma torch made short work of the metal barriers. "Dad!" Sojin threw herself into his arms, tears streaming down her face. "I knew you'd come. I knew you wouldn't leave me here." "Never," Han said, holding his daughter tight. "I will always come for you." But their reunion was interrupted by the sound of running footsteps and shouted commands. Voss's elite guards were closing in, and the estate's defensive systems were coming back online as backup generators restored power to critical systems. "We need to move," Han told Sojin, handing her a small energy weapon. "Stay behind me and only use this if someone gets past me." They made it halfway to the estate's landing platform before Voss appeared, flanked by his personal security team. The collector no longer looked like a refined nobleman. His expensive clothes were disheveled, his face twisted with rage at seeing his prized possession being stolen. "You think you can walk into my home and take what belongs to me?" Voss snarled, raising a military-grade plasma rifle. "I spent years planning to acquire that specimen. She represents a unique opportunity for research." "She's not a specimen," Han replied calmly, placing himself between Voss and So-Jin. "She's my daughter. Your daughter is property now, legally, purchased through proper channels. You have no claim to her." Han's response was swift and decisive. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds, ending with Voss's guards unconscious or dead, and the collector himself backing toward his private escape vessel with a smoking wound in his shoulder. "This isn't over," Voss gasped as he stumbled up the ship's boarding ramp. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have connections throughout the galaxy, resources you can't imagine." But Han was already moving, following Voss onto the ship even as it began lifting off from the landing platform. The vessel was sleek and fast, designed for quick escapes, when Voss's activities attracted unwanted attention. Unfortunately for the collector, it was also cramped and poorly designed for combat. The ship's cargo hold contained more prisoners, beings from across the galaxy who had been selected for Voss's private collection. Han found them secured in individual containment pods, unconscious but alive. Among them was a young Altarian whose singing voice had caught Voss's attention, and an elderly Centaurian scholar whose knowledge of ancient languages made him valuable. "We're getting everyone out," Han told So-Jin as he began the release sequence for the containment pods. "No one gets left behind." The ship shuddered as external weapons fire struck its hull. The estate's orbital defense platforms were targeting the vessel, trying to prevent Voss from escaping with evidence of his crimes. But their weapons were also endangering the prisoners aboard, forcing Han to work quickly while the ship bucked and rolled under defensive fire. Voss's elite guards made their stand in the ship's main corridor, using the narrow space to create a choke point that should have stopped any assault. But Han had fought in ship corridors before, during boarding actions and rescue missions throughout his mercenary career. He knew how to use the confined space to his advantage, turning the defenders' cover into traps and their superior numbers into a liability. The battle moved through the ship section by section, with Han advancing methodically while protecting the freed prisoners who followed behind him. When the artificial gravity failed due to battle damage, the fighting became three-dimensional, with combatants using walls and ceilings as cover, while exchanging fire in zero-gravity chaos. Han excelled in zero-gravity combat. His mercenary training had included extensive practice in space-based operations, and his human physiology gave him advantages that many alien species lacked. While Voss's guards struggled to orient themselves in the weightless environment, Han moved with fluid precision, using every surface as a potential firing position. The final confrontation took place on the ship's bridge, where Voss was desperately trying to regain control of his damaged vessel. The escape ship was tumbling toward the system's primary star, its engines damaged and navigation systems failing. Warning lights flashed throughout the bridge as automated systems announced hull breaches and life support failures. "You've destroyed everything," Voss screamed at Han, his composure completely gone. "This ship was worth more than entire planets. My collection represented decades of work. You've ruined me." "Good," Han replied, moving toward the manual controls while keeping his weapon trained on Voss. "Wait!" Voss raised his hands in surrender. "You don't understand what you're doing. I'm not just a collector. I'm a key financial backer for half the criminal organizations in this sector. The Crimson Syndicate, the Outer Rim Pirates, the weapons smugglers. They all depend on my funding. If you kill me, you'll destabilize the entire region." Han considered this information for a moment, then shook his head. "The galaxy will find a way to survive without you." Voss made one last desperate attempt to reach a hidden weapon, but Han was faster. The collector's death was swift and final, ending years of suffering for countless victims across the galaxy. With Voss gone, Han took manual control of the damaged ship, using skills he had learned during his military service to stabilize the vessel and plot a course toward inhabited space. The engine repairs would require constant attention, and the life support systems were operating at minimal capacity, but they would make it to safety. so Jin floated beside him in the zero gravity, helping with the navigation calculations while the other freed prisoners secured themselves in the passenger compartments. She had seen her father killed to protect her, had witnessed violence that no child should ever experience, but her trust in him remained absolute. "Dad," she said quietly as they worked together to keep the ship operational. "What happens now? Can we go back to Haven's Rest?" Han looked at his daughter, seeing new maturity in her eyes. The innocent farm girl who had taken evening walks through peaceful settlements was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the galaxy could be a dangerous place for those without the strength to defend themselves. "We can go anywhere you want," he said. "But our quiet life is probably over. Too many people know who I really am now." "That's okay," Sojin replied, adjusting the navigation controls with steady hands. "I'd rather have a dangerous father who comes for me than a safe one who doesn't." As their damaged ship limped toward the nearest space station, Han realized that his daughter was right. He had spent 15 years trying to forget who he used to be, but some parts of a person's identity couldn't be buried forever. He was Ghost, Walker, the galaxy's most dangerous human, and he was also Han Wu, a father who would cross any line to protect his family. The galaxy would remember both names and tremble at the thought of threatening either one again.